So it's finally time for us to go and talk about the PlayStation 4 Pro and see how this particular console holds up in 2024. Now, the first thing you have to remember is that with the PlayStation 4 Pro, this was a very interesting console when it first came out. Before this, we definitely got successors of the other PlayStations and the other consoles before this. But I think this was the first time we got like an actual Pro model. Before this time, I think most of the consoles were basically going for, like kind of like a slimmer model of the, original generation, or they were trying to cut corners and make a cheaper generation of the other, consoles. I think Sony did a really good job with their PlayStation 4 Pros, and I think Xbox did a really good job with their Xbox One X. And I was really happy about this generation of consoles because there was just so many different things going on for these particular, consoles. There was just so much capability. So with the PlayStation 4 Pro, at its core, what it was trying to do was that all it was trying to do was just create somewhat of a faster console than the previous generation. That's kind of the name of the game. They're not really trying to go ahead and create a PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 4 Pro. Sony was probably already, pretty much working on the PlayStation 5 when they were making the PS4 Pro. So it's kind of what you'd expect. They were doing a really good job with this console. So you have to kind of give them, a little bit of credit. And it's crazy because in 2 years, the PlayStation 4 Pro is actually going to be 10 years old, which is crazy. This console was actually announced in 2016 and pretty much was released in 2016 as well. So when you think about that, this console turning 10 years old is pretty crazy because, as I said before, back in 2020 when the PlayStation 5s came out, I felt like the overlap between the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, there's going to be a longer overlap there than there was with the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4. And now that we're almost 10 years into the cycle of the PS4 Pro, you can definitely see that this console, I think, still has a lot of power, still has so much capability, and because of the landscape change, because of digital gaming and all these things, you don't really, developers really aren't just going through and just automatically just only making games for the PlayStation 5s or the current generation, because there's still so many people who are using the last generation. So that's a really big thing to keep in mind with these particular consoles as well. Now, with the PlayStation 4 Pro, one of the biggest selling points that Sony was trying to do with this particular console was actually try to get people more into 4K gaming. So with the PlayStation 4 Pro, this was kind of its, one of its biggest selling points was that you could play, most of the games that are supported on your PlayStation 4 in 4K. You could do it on your 4K TV, and there could be enhancements that Sony could do and throw in inside of this particular console to make people want to upgrade just for that alone. Now, 4K gaming is kind of like what you'd expect in a lot of games nowadays. It's kind of like a given. But at that time, most games were only being played in 1080p. So, of course, even if you had a 4K monitor, you still had to kind of keep that in mind. But with this particular console, it was 4K native. So that was a very cool thing going on for this particular device. And although nowadays it seems pretty basic, you could probably go up to 8K now, it is still a nice thing to have a console like this that can give you that type of capability at that point. I do think this in and of itself is a very cool thing, and it is again one of my favorite things going on for the PlayStation 4 Pro. You're also getting faster frame rates inside of the PlayStation 4 Pro as well, so if you're trying to still get a pretty good console, the fact that this thing can still go up and give you some, faster frame rates compared to the PlayStation 4 is a very big asset, because then you can go ahead and still play some of these more intensive games, because you do have more power inside the PlayStation 4 Pro, you can go and play those games at faster frame rates, which is genuinely very cool. But pretty much the biggest thing that the PlayStation 4 Pro brought over the standard PlayStation 4 was the power. Now, this is by far probably one of the biggest differences. Sony was stating that you were getting double the power of the PlayStation 4 in the PlayStation 4 Pro. This in and of itself is such a crazy spec and such a crazy improvement coming from the original PlayStation 4. The fact that you were getting twice the amount of GPU power inside of your PlayStation 4 Pro. Now, this was the one thing that kind of confused me a little bit, but it was a really smart thing. Like I said before this, we weren't getting really pro consoles. We were getting, improvements and, thinner consoles for the most part. But because we were getting such a much more powerful console towards the end of their lifespan, you were getting such a more powerful console than the original. I just felt like developers would just continue to, make games for these types of consoles, especially if people are still owning them. Because, these developers can still make more money from their older games. They don't have to go and, try to only, meet a certain demand of people for if there's 100 million people who can play the game and 60 million of them are still on the older console, they are probably still going to go ahead and make the, game for the older, consoles. Not meaning that there's going to be 100 million people playing the game, but that's just an example. This case made me think that this, PlayStation 4 Pro could last even longer, even throughout the whole entire generation of the, next generation. And that may end up happening with the PlayStation 5 Pro whenever that that comes out as well. But with this console, that is crazy. Just imagine getting all your games when the original PlayStation 4 came out. Imagine you bought one in 2011 or 2012. Then 4 years later, you're able to play those same exact games on a much more powerful console. That's a very cool thing going on here. You were getting faster load times. Your images were looking better. You were getting smoother gameplay, and just overall the games were just much more enhanced. That definitely made a lot more sense to me, and that is by far one of the coolest things going on for the PlayStation 4 Pro. On top of that, although the RAM was basically the same, you were getting essentially the same exact amount of RAM between both, you were getting essentially twice the amount of base storage coming from the original PlayStation 4 over to the PlayStation 4 Pro. So there was a 1TB option on the PlayStation 4, but if you're getting that base 500GB option, you were now getting only one model, which is that 1TB option on the PlayStation 4 Pro, which I think was a pretty cool thing. The craziest thing though is that for their GPU, their CPUs were almost identical, but their GPUs, as you probably would have suspected, 1.84 teraflops on the original PlayStation 4, that went up to 4.2 teraflops on the PlayStation 4 Pro. That's over twice the amount, and that was by far, I would say, one of the biggest improvements of the PlayStation 4 Pro. Now, without even comparing it against the original PlayStation 4s or anything like that, I would tell you, the PlayStation 4 Pro, even on the features that it has in and of itself and the capability, I would still say is a very decent and still a very good console. The thing I like a lot about these PlayStation 4s, especially the PlayStation 4 Pro, is that you were essentially getting all those games that you could play on the, games that were supported on the PlayStation 4. You were able to play all of those games for that particular lineup. And there are still lots of games that are still able to be played on this particular console that are still fairly newer and still fairly new. You have to remember that with the PlayStation 4 Pro, this particular console, I would say, still has a lot of capability here. There's a lot of games that are still being made for this console, that are still being updated, and I do think this in and of itself is a very good thing going on for this particular device, because that way you can go and buy this console and still have lots of features and lots of improvements and lots of updates going on just for buying this thing, and they're not going to be super expensive. And the biggest thing too is that because this thing had a disc tray inside of it, you can just go ahead and essentially buy all these used games in the used market. You can buy all sorts of different games like that, and then you can just go ahead and basically just update it as you normally would, and you can just buy those used games, play them, and you can even sell them again after. This is a cool thing about having the capability of playing both digital games and disc games inside of this console. So what I will tell you is that the PlayStation 4 Pro, in my opinion, is still completely worth buying. I think this thing is still a very, very good console. The only caveat I would kind of say is that, one, if you're planning on keeping this console for the next 10 years, just keep in mind that you won't, there's probably not going to be insane amount of games that are being made for this thing 3 years from now, 4 years from now. And a lot of developers are probably going to start shifting focus and only creating games for the next generation. So that in and of itself is one big thing to keep in mind. And also, if you want to, get a better console, the PlayStation 5 overall is a better console than this thing. But if that's not a big deal to you, or if you have a big, library of PlayStation 4 games, you might as well just go and pick up the PlayStation 4 Pro, buy it in the used market, save some money, and I do think that's a very good option going on for this particular device. So from that side of things, that kind of covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.